Well, last week we spoke about you putting on your red engineer's jacket and this whole idea of how to engineer a better recovery environment, how to, in one sense, outsource willpower. And we talked about this idea of eliminating certain things to, again, create a more of a successful recovery experience. And just to review last week, we talked about eliminating anything that revolves around unconscious and addictive behaviors. Number 2, eliminating anything which requires us to choose the right behavior repeatedly in a day. Number 3, eliminate any relationships which don't serve us well. Number 4, eliminate the clutter from your life. And number 5, eliminate working memory, which is all about removing unnecessary mental clutter. So today on Finding Traction, we look at some of the things that we can add into our lives. Helpful, useful, important things. Now that you have found all sorts of new room because of all the things you've gotten rid of, today we're talking about adding things. It's kind of like what you do when football season ends and you go, now what do I do with the weekends? Kind of like that. So welcome aboard.
Guys ready?
When it comes to porn, are you stuck, spinning out, or slipping backwards in your life? If so, then welcome to the Finding Traction podcast, a show dedicated to those who are looking to gain recovery momentum away from porn and toward the life and relationships they have always hoped for. Now, here's your host, Vern Tomke.
Well, let me say, like I always usually say at the beginning of the podcast, I love to connect with guys who want to end their toxic relationship with porn and start a new, better life. So if you're one of those guys and you're looking for help, you want to talk to me, you want to get on a one-on-one Zoom call with me, you can reach out to me at bandofbrothers.care@gmail.com. And again, I love to connect with guys from all different countries, all different faith backgrounds, or people with no faith background, or, the whole idea is people that are reaching out looking for help. They're saying, I want my life to be better, and I realize to make it better, porn has got to go. So let me get back now to this whole idea of engineering our environment. Last week, again, we talked about removing some things. Today, we want to talk about adding some things back, reintroducing some things, or maybe adding them in for the very first time, things that can help you be more successful in your life and relationships. And once again, I'm indebted to the book Willpower Doesn't Work by Benjamin Hardy. And some of the ideas are his. I'll try to quote him and give him attribution where it's to do with his ideas, but most of the applications are mine. So here we go. Let's talk about adding some things in. Here's the first one. Adding in a trigger for your trigger. Now, if you've been in recovery material, you've been learning about recovery for any length of time, you know all about triggers. Triggers are those sorts of things that happen in our environment or our emotions that start the whole sexual arousal process. Listen to how it's really interesting how Benjamin Hardy combats triggers. He does it by adding a trigger to your trigger. Listen to how he puts it. This is what he says, quote, sometimes you'll be in situations where you'll be triggered to act against your desires and goals. Rather than relying on willpower, you'll need to create an automated response for how to deal with challenges. In other words, you need to create a trigger for the trigger. Once you're triggered to self-sabotage, that very trigger triggers you to do something more positive. Unquote. Now, the way you do this is you establish sort of if-then scenarios to prepare for those triggering situations which are going to come up. Let me go back then to a quote here from Benjamin Hardy. He says, you'll want to practice your if-then responses until it's a habitual trigger to the negative trigger. Your pre-planned behavior should be initiated immediately, efficiently, and without need for further resolve or thought. It should be very simple and easy. Thus, your implementation is more than just a roadmap. It's an automated trigger. End quote. Okay, so how do I do this? Excuse me. Now, for what I do is I will kind of make a distinction between what are external triggers and what are internal triggers. So, for example, seeing a suggestive pop-up or a triggering person out in public, that would be an example of an external or environmental trigger. So here's what I do. When I see somebody I really want to check out, I say to myself, okay, Vern, that's an arousing person. I turn away, and I usually I carry with me like a Tic Tac or something, and I pop a Tic Tac into my mouth, and I say, attaboy, you're doing the right thing. It's a trigger for my trigger. When I'm confronted with a fantasy, and I think I shared in a recent podcast, I woke up one morning and I was just presented with this really strong, fantastical fantasy scenario. And it didn't want to seem to leave. So in my if-then scenario, what I said is, if I am presented with a strong fantasy and I'm lying in bed, first thing I'll do is get out of bed. Good start. And then I'll text one of my friends and say, I'm floating and I need to come back to Earth. Then I pop in a Tic Tac. Right? It's that whole idea. It's a trigger for the trigger. Now, when I'm triggered by something that is more subtle, like a subtle emotional triggers, and those ones are sometimes a little harder to gauge. For example, let's say when I'm bored. That's one that oftentimes I notice. So I'm bored. I've kind of run out of things to do. So I will, when I'm bored, if I am bored, then I will say, time to read a book. And I'll reach for my book series that I always carry with me. I actually say it out loud to remind myself I'm bored right now. If I'm on the intranet and I'm starting to experience that feeling, I've checked out the 3 or 4 things that I want to check out, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, maybe I should check out some more. I'll say, sounds like I'm bored. Time to read a book. A trigger for my trigger. So that's the first thing that we look at adding in to create a more successful environment. Here's a second one. Adding in some increased human connections. I think we've all come to realize that primarily our porn and edging behaviors are actions of disconnection. And the more we can build strong human connections, the more strength and stability we have in our recovery. I often go for a walk that goes up this mountain, and the top of the mountain, it's not a big mountain, trust me, I'm not, it's a small mountain. It's called Little Mountain, okay? But it's still a mountain, so give me a break. But at the top of this mountain, there is a tall radio tower. And that radio tower has a number of what's called guy wires, which are all around the tower, completely opposite from each other, maybe 6 or 8. And I've noticed the more guy wires there are, the more stable and strong that tower will be in a strong windstorm, for example. Experienced a strong windstorm recently? That's where you need to make use of those increased human connections. So if you're struggling and you don't know where to turn, then begin to look around and say, how can I increase up my human connections? How can I build some further relationships? Absolutely huge to combat those disconnecting activities. Number 3, add in some focused daily routines. I've come to observe as I'm working with guys individually in groups, the guys that seem to experience more success than others are the guys that have developed and they are learning to practice some sort of consistent daily practices. They're like, rebar in the cement they're pouring, and it strengthens their days and strengthens their recovery growth. So, let me just give you, I think I could grow in this area, but let's just give you a few common examples of some places in your day that you could introduce some focused daily routines. Now, first of all, you're probably not surprised to hear that it's common knowledge that probably the morning routine is more important than any other. For example, there's a great book out there called Miracle Morning by Hal Elrod, E-L-R-O-D, and they talk about a morning routine as reducing stress and anxiety, improving focus and drive, and helping you be more grounded, connected, and confident as you head out into your day. Now, before we get to any sort of idea of a good morning routine, let me just say this. You know what the biggest enemy of a morning routine is? It's not getting up. Well, that's really surprising. Yeah, the biggest enemy of a morning routine is not getting up in time to have a morning routine. And why is that, you ask? Well, because probably more likely than not, we didn't go to bed at a consistent and early enough time the night before that enables us to have a good and full night's sleep. That's a topic for another day. Going back to this book, The Miracle Morning by Hal Elrod, he actually advocates waking up an hour earlier and devoting that time to developing yourself through silence, affirmations, visualizations, exercise, reading, and scribing, or journaling. Again, an hour earlier. Well, that ain't going to happen if you're not going to bed an hour earlier the night before, or you're trying to watch that one extra show that you're binging. Now, I admit to you, I've got some work to do here. I, for example, am not good at journaling. I always tell myself, Jesus never journaled, so why should I? But I am pretty good at going to bed on time, getting out of bed when my alarm goes, getting my morning cup of coffee, and then sitting and opening up a meditation app each morning. Here's one thing I've done that has been helpful. I have a lazy boy in the living room, then a lazy boy out here where I do my podcasts. My lazy boy in the living room is where I do that. It's away from my computer. My computer is what I use to check emails and the news and work-related stuff. Out in my chair in the living room is where I sit. Before I come in here, it's where I sit and I get my head straight in the morning. I'm still not journaling, but I'm working on it, okay? So anyways, and if you are a journaler, here's a couple good questions that you could ask. Number one, in order for me to be successful or feel good about my day, ... as you start out in your day. Second one could be, what are the following challenges that I will face today? I mean, that's just a couple simple ones. So that, a morning routine is super important. Now, I have other routines that I do. For example, I don't do my exercise first thing in the mornings, but every day, partly because my work schedule is pretty flexible most days, every day I have an hour of exercise. I get out and hit the trail and power walk for an hour. If I don't do that, literally I feel like I've missed a meal. It's just become that ingrained. My thoughts return to it over and over again. I haven't got my walk in. I haven't got my walk in. I haven't got my walk in. Then it's a routine, right? Let me just say, in terms of developing habits as well, this is where your phone can actually serve you instead of you being its slave. Set a couple reminders for yourself that go off over set times in the day to remind you if you want to introduce a routine to your day. Another routine I practice is it's just this little gratefulness routine that me and my wife practice at supper time. Before we eat supper, we all, basically tell each other the things that happened that day that we're grateful for. So I think truly that gratefulness is one of those vitamins we need to take every day. Talking about vitamins, that's part of my evening routine. Brush, floss, take my vitamins, and prostate pill. Yes, getting older sucks, right? So for you young people, you don't even have to think about that. There you go. But that's part of my evening routine. I also have other evening routines or rituals that are super just important here. Obviously, one of the routines that you hear over and over again is, if you have a partner, not staying up after your partner goes to bed, just to finish something. That's often where we run into trouble. And that's often one of the very first routines that we need to nail to the ground. Me and my wife have another nightly routine. Every night we ask ourselves this little it's like a cleansing routine. We ask each other, did I do anything to hurt you today? We started this when we started going out many, many years ago. And it was based on the principle of not letting the sun go down in your anger. Without doing a whole lesson on that principle in itself, all we use that for, this little routine, is to make sure there's no unresolved hurts from our day. If there is, it's a forgiveness and a releasing the other person. Now, it's not for resolving disagreements. My wife still doesn't agree with me on everything, but I will continue to keep trying to get her fully on board. But all it has to do with, was there any accumulated hurts? One last example, and for those of you from maybe more of a spiritual or biblical worldview, I love the idea of, there's a verse, I think in Psalms, that talks about God's love in the morning and his faithfulness at night. And it kind of fits with the same idea of a ritual or a routine. And at night, oftentimes, the very last thing I will do in the night, before I go to bed, and I fall asleep pretty quick, is I will often, maybe ask myself, how did I feel about the day? Remember, you started the day by asking maybe what would I, in order for me to successfully feel good about the day or the challenges. Now you could reflect on this. Today I moved forward or back in this way. And again, most importantly, today I'm grateful for this. Every night I lie in bed, probably 95% of the nights, the very last thing on my mind is, I thank God for a day of recovery, of being porn free. And I also say I am one day closer to finishing well. Now I know that sounds heavy, but it's important for me. It's motivating for me. So that's number 3, adding in a daily routine. Now, number 4 is adding in a true recovery day. Can you imagine taking an entire day a week for self-care? Yes, I know some of you are already listing sort of mental objections as to why that wouldn't be practical for you. But I really first learned about this from my wife when we were both university students at UBC. You might find this surprising, but I was actually a bit of a keener. And I was always the kind of guy that was, I never procrastinated usually around schoolwork. I was always the kind of guy who was always trying to get ahead on my work and my assignments. For me, every day, 7 days a week was a work day. And my wife, she was like, I'm sorry, Sunday's my day of rest. I don't do schoolwork on Sunday. Let's go out and have some fun. Now, I was in a real bind because I was crazy about her, and she wanted to go out and have fun, and I wanted to spend time with her, but I also had all this schoolwork that I thought had to be done 7 days a week. So that's kind of where I learned it, and obviously that's also part of many religious traditions as well. Now, Today on my day off, I don't do recovery calls. I don't write. I don't write for podcasts. A new thing I've been trying is I don't even necessarily watch the news or check the news out on my phone. I want to give my small brain a rest, 1 day a week. Here's another idea that we used to do. Now my wife's teaching and I'm doing mostly this, but before we used to work in the same office and had pretty much the same job. And the problem with that is we tended to bring our work home. So what we learned to do at the end of every work week, when the week was done and it was heading into the weekend, or our days off, we would do a high five. And the agreement was that until the next day of work started, 1 or 2 days down the road, you could not bring up any shop talk, any people problems at work, anything that could all wait until you got back to work. We needed a break. Maybe sometimes it's simply because we think we can control everything. I don't know. But I think we need to give our bodies a rest, our minds a rest. Talking about giving our bodies a rest, as you can probably tell, I am just getting over the flu. I essentially felt crappy for 7 days straight. I still got a bit of this cough, but But part of the challenge was, even when I had the flu, is I still teach on Tuesdays and Fridays. And this last Tuesday, I didn't want to miss the money I make from teaching. So I told my wife, I think I'm up to teaching. I'm not feeling totally better, but I think I can tough it out. And she was like, what? That's dumb. You don't tell your body what to do. Your body tells you what to do. She's always, telling me good things like that I don't listen to. So this last Tuesday, the alarm went off first thing in the morning, 6 o'clock in the morning. And she was like, turn it off. Don't answer it. I know you're not better yet, which I wasn't. I had a headache. I didn't feel good. And this time I listened. And now, 2 days later, I'm actually feeling much better. My body is telling me I can go back to work again. I'm now once again this lean, mean fighting machine. Well, not so much the lean part, but I am feeling better. Physical recovery is a real thing. It's interesting, for example, there's a massive difference between how men and women respond to a sports injury. For example, men take way longer to go after an injury to see a sports medicine doctor than do women. Men are twice as likely to wait more than 2 years between doctor's visits, right? And men wait until their injuries are far more severe than women. Why? I don't know. Do we think we can tough it out, or we don't take self-care seriously? I don't know why. It also is interesting that 20% of men admit to going to the doctor just so a loved one will stop bothering them about it. So the only reason I'm giving you these stats is I recently went to a doctor, and recently I underwent a colonoscopy, something I had been putting off for years. Apparently everyone over 45 or 50 is supposed to get one, something like that, and I'm well over that. But now I just found out my sister had been diagnosed with a tumor. So my male friend who does colonoscopy says, don't put it off any longer. So self-care. So having a part of your routine, a weekly routine. All right. Number 5, a recovery weekend. Okay. Now, this is almost going to start sound like a marriage podcast or something, but I want to throw out one important thing to do, especially if you are living with children, okay, and raising children together with your spouse. Now, one of the things, for example, me and my wife did, we led a marriage education seminar for 12 years. We did it based on the research from John Gottman, who is this renowned marriage counselor from Seattle. And here's something. We took like over 300 couples or more through this course, a lot of couples. And this is the research, what the research is showing. the number one threat to your relationship is leading parallel lives, gradually drifting apart and then living disconnected lives without any real touch points. So one application or homework we gave every couple was they had to make a plan to get away out of town without their kids. They had to leave their kids, I don't know, with some stranger or something, or a babysitter. They had to get away for at least 24 to 36 hours out of town. It had to include a hotel. It had to include no kids. It had to include a night out at a restaurant. And they had to do it every 4 months or 3 times a year. I mean, we heard all the excuses. Too much money. How, we can't do it. We're too busy. Our schedules don't line up. And we would say you can not afford to do it. What is it? You cannot afford to not do it? You know what I'm saying? We did it. We have practiced this religiously every 3 to 4 months since we have been married. We would, and when our kids were small, we would find someone brave enough to take our 3 little demons, or they would come over and they would they would stay at our place, and we would leave just before supper. We would head out of town, grab a hotel, and all that included, go out to supper, maybe catch a movie or go for a long walk, and we would come back just before supper the next day to put our kids to bed, and let our babysitter run out of the house screaming. Could never figure out why we always had to find a new person every time. That's kind of mostly kidding. Our kids weren't all that bad. They've all grown up to be more or less well-adjusted members of society. So, but where there's a will, there's a way. I've heard young couples kind of banding together and swapping so that it's cheaper and they know the person who's going to be with their kids. You just need to get creative. Just yesterday, me and my wife were planning our time. Spring break's coming up in about 3-4 weeks, and we're going to get away for 2 nights. We're going to use the points from our grocery store and our credit card. Even as empty nesters, we continually say to each other, we got to get away. And we're people that we're homebodies. We're people that love being at home. Just that we had developed a rhythm for so many years. If you're a single person, and you got kids at home, I know there's a lot of, maybe a single dad raising kids or whatever your situation, I would say the situation's equally important. So, engineering your environment. Last time we talked about removing some things. Today we talked about, now that there's room in your life, we talked about how to add in things which will increase the success towards the lifestyle that you're looking for. We'll see you next week.